Hey y'all, this is Caitlin and we are back here with This is Caitlin Crime Time segment. My channel is now dedicated to crime time and doing like murder mysteries, true crime stories, and so forth. If you haven't subscribed to my vlog channel, you can do so. I'll link it below. It's This is Caitlin space vlog life. So yeah, now I have two channels, one dedicated to you guys here, Crime Time. So if you were here for my vlogs before and my story times, my whatever, you can go follow This is Caitlin Vlog Life. And please subscribe to that channel. It's very new. But yeah, I just wanted to organize my channels a little bit so I don't mix my two audiences. My cat. Wow, how rude. Let's go ahead and get into Krystal's story.
Where's your emergency?
Today I'm going to talk about the case of Krystal Beslanowitch, who was found outside in Salt Lake City, Utah, murdered by the side of a riverbank in 1995. And this case really gives us hope to know that cold cases can be solved. And I will cover a lot of cold cases on this channel, and I want you to know that even 13 years later, 20 years later, as we can see with DNA, that things are changing and cold cases are being solved. Krystal is from Spokane, Washington. She had recently moved to Salt Lake City, Utah. When in Washington, she kind of had a troubled life from a young age. At 4, Krystal's father died in a drowning accident. And from there, things just got pretty rocky for her. Her stepfather had told police later on that she was doing sex work and drugs from the age of 12. Her mother mentions it was 15, but either way, she was a child, and I don't technically consider it sex work because she wasn't at any legal age to really be doing that legally with her body anyways. At the age of 19, Krystal decided what she wanted to do was start kind of a new leaf, start a new journey. Back home, she had ran away a lot from home from the age of 15 onward. She had gotten involved with a bad crowd who just really influenced her to go into drugs more, and she was trying to kind of start fresh. So she moved to Salt Lake City, Utah, and she had only been there a few months before her body was found. On December 15th, Krystal's body was found at the Provo River by 2 ranchers. I believe a man and his son were out ranching, and they found what we hear many times they thought was a mannequin. The son told his father. They went to investigate a little bit, and the police were called. At this time, the sheriff came to the crime scene. So on the crime scene was Detective Bonner. He was an investigator during Krystal's death, and he really put his heart into this case. There were not a lot of murders or homicides in this area, so for him this was a really big one. Like, this is going to stick with him for his whole life. So they found Krystal. She was face down, naked, and her body was pretty badly beaten. In the area where they were, along the river, are limestone, I believe it's limestone rocks, which are not naturally located there. So at some point they had put these rocks there to help form the river, and when Detective Bonner got there, he obviously started to investigate the crime scene. Like I mentioned, Krystal's body was badly beaten, and it was obvious at this time that someone had beaten her with the surrounding rocks. There was blood on them. She had marks on her hands. She was found face down, and she also had been beaten on her back as well. But what had killed her was a laceration to her head. Also, it was a major head trauma, and that is what ended up killing Krystal. At this time, the forensic evidence on the crime scene was collected by Rudy Ree, and with joint effort of Sheriff Bonner. I believe he was sheriff, so that's what I want to call him. Sheriff Bonner and Rudy Ree collected evidence from Krystal's body and the surrounding area. At this time, DNA is not what it is today, but these men were ahead of the curve. They collected fingernail trimmings, they collected hair samples, they collected the rocks that were used. They took all of these bits and pieces and kept them as evidence. Even though at the time, this could not help them to find who did this, it was just their own thinking. Rudy Ree must have been, I'm sorry, my cat's meowing. Rudy Ree must have been ahead of his time because he thought that in the future, this could help to solve cases. Like, evidence was being examined quickly in 1995. Advances were happening quickly. And with Ree's insightful mind, he thought this could someday be useful. When examining the crime scene, Krystal's clothes were not on her. She was completely nude, but they did find a pair of socks with a little hole in the bottom, folded up and placed like on a rock to the side, which is extremely odd because she didn't have any of the rest of her clothes. And what would be the reasoning that her socks would be there? This kind of blew my mind when I was reading it because it was so unusual. And the other unusual aspect was that they were folded and left there. It was just really odd. But they collected the evidence and now they were trying to identify who Krystal was, which we find out was Krystal. But because her head was so badly beaten, they couldn't really use a photograph or any facial recognition to identify who this Jane Doe was. But they decided after seeing that she had 2 tattoos that they were going to have another person in the department draw these tattoos. So the tattoos were drawn that were collected from Krystal's body and they were put in the news to try to identify this missing person. After putting these out in the news and trying to figure out who this Jane Doe is, they received a call from a man named Chris. After receiving the call from Chris, the body was identified as Tracy Belsanowitch. So I know that's odd because we've been referring to her as Krystal, but detectives took this information and traced down a Tracy Belsanowitch who was from Spokane, Washington, and they called and they talked to a man. This man was Jeff, and his daughter was Tracy. But when he got the call, he's like, "What are you talking about? My daughter Tracy is like right here next to me. I see her. It's not, there's no way it can be her. She doesn't live in Utah. She's been here the whole time, and I'm in the room with her." Turns out Jeff, the stepfather, was the stepfather of Krystal Beslanowitch. So Krystal had been using her stepsister Tracy's identity. Tracy was a little bit older than her, and I guess she had been using Tracy's identity for a long time, even back in Spokane, Washington, because she did get in a lot of trouble. And if she was a little bit older, it could get her out of some of these problems. So after the police were able to identify the Jane Doe as Krystal, they found it suspicious, like, why did Chris lie and say this person was Tracy? So, of course, he was a #1 suspect. They went to the hotel and continued to investigate Chris, but they were able to quickly rule him out as being a suspect. They do believe that Chris was Krystal's pimp, but he was also her boyfriend as well, from what we know. He actually lived in Washington with Krystal, and they moved to Salt Lake City, Utah together. And he was a little bit older than her, but not by a large amount. He was in his like mid-20s. So they talked with Chris and they asked him, like, so why were you using Tracy? And he then continued to tell them, like, it's just the name she used. And she also used this name when she was working, doing sex work out in Salt Lake City. The reason detectives ruled Chris out is because basically they were new to Salt Lake City, like they had no car. So there's no way that Chris could have gotten Krystal's body out to the Povo River where she was found. And she was the breadwinner, honestly, of the relationship. So she was bringing in the money that supported Chris, and there is really no motive. It turns out that Chris had been worried about Krystal because the night before she was found, she went out to do some work. He does mention she went to the Circle K, which is like a local convenience store. It's just one of the main little convenience stores that they have in the United States. But I'm assuming this is maybe where the area she picked up other work. So I believe, and I'm sure the officers as well believe, that Krystal was doing sex work in these areas. So they went to the area, and not a lot of other sex workers were really wanting to talk to the cops, but they did mention like Krystal always looked nice, she always was well presented, and she always took care of herself. So this was mentioned by some other sex workers who were interviewed. So around 11 o'clock the night before her murder, Chris was kind of worried because she never stayed out late. Like, she would always come home after working, and she was really reliable. So around 11, he went to the Circle K and he couldn't find her. He was worried, but that's kind of the last known time we have of somebody looking for her. So a few days later, when he saw on the news, that's why he made the call. Now we'll go back to Detective Bonner and his investigation. He was scrutinized a little bit for dedicating himself so much to this case, but in some interviews, he mentioned, she is a young girl. If this was your daughter, I have 3 daughters, and if this was your daughter, you would want me to find justice for this girl. Continuing in the investigation, a second suspect came up, and that person was a taxi driver by the name of Herb Fry. And I had read somewhere that he turned himself in, and then I also heard that some of the other sex workers had mentioned this man who was kind of infatuated with Krystal. I'm going to go with the theory that he turned himself in because he really was infatuated with her and was worried about her, supposedly. Anyways, he went to the police talked to him, and some of his other friends mentioned that he had often said, like, I would kill for her. Like, if I can't have her, no one can. These are obviously, like, red freaking flags. But after later investigating, they couldn't connect anything to Herb Fry. And these were the only 2 suspects that were ever in Krystal's case. No DNA matched. They couldn't get any true evidence. I want to mention one interesting fact, though. Krystal's boyfriend had mentioned that it was odd that they found socks because Krystal was really weird with feet. She always had socks on her feet. She never took her socks off. When she got in the shower, she would always fold them neatly. So that kind of leaves us to wondering, like, why did Krystal take off her socks and fold them there if she was nude and just had on her socks? Like, what was the importance of that? And we just don't know because Krystal, unfortunately, can't tell us what was going on in her mind at the time. Okay, guys, now I want to get into advances in the scientific capabilities of matching and finding new DNA evidence. So one major advancement for this case in forensic evidence was the M-Vac. So what the M-Vac is, it's basically like creates a little hurricane type of formation against evidence, and it uses it to suck it up. So it swishes around the area and sucks up the DNA that can be found on an item or so forth. So at this time, I believe it was 2008, the M-Vac started appearing and becoming something that could be used to collect DNA evidence. So in 2008, they realized this, and DNA from one of the rocks, I think it was the rock that ended Krystal's life, they found a partial fingerprint. So in 2008, they swabbed this fingerprint, and ding dong, there was a hit. The match came in 2013 when CODIS was able to find a match with the DNA found from the fingerprint on the rock that killed Krystal. Detective Bonner went back onto this case to help find justice for Krystal.
It wasn't going anywhere, but it wasn't until we learned about M-Vac that the case took a drastic change for the better. And I truly believe that without the knowledge that the individuals who put the time and effort into creating such a sensitive forensic piece of equipment, this case would never have been solved.
I just love this. It's like a full circle moment because Bonner really did for many years keep this case going. He refused to not keep trying for Krystal. And this case had really, as he said, haunted him all his life. And I think it's just really a moment for him and for Krystal's family. So the CODIS matched the DNA and it had a hit in Florida. The new suspect and presumably the person who killed Krystal was Joseph Michael Simpson. Joseph was living in Florida, like I mentioned before. And immediately detectives went to Florida, notified him. They followed him for a very long period. Not just like within a few days, but they were trying to track more information on Joseph and they needed to confirm that the DNA was his. So after multiple days of like stakeouts watching Joseph, they finally were able to collect a cigarette butt from the ground and get his DNA off of this. It ended up being a match. And Detective Bonner was able to actually put the handcuffs on Joseph Simpson. So now, this is 13 years later, they are able to arrest Joseph Simpson for the murder of Krystal Beslanowitch.
While a 20-year-old murder case came down to DNA and an airport shuttle route. Tonight, we know that evidence was enough as jurors have found Joseph Simpson guilty of aggravated murder in the 1995 death of Krystal Beslanowitch.
Yay, guys, it's justice. I'm so excited about that. From this, we were able to learn some new information about what happened to Krystal. I mean, it's not 100%, but it's assumed that Krystal was doing some sex work and Simpson went ahead and picked Krystal up. They were involved in consensual sexual activity when Simpson took it a little bit too far at some point and really scared Krystal. So they would have driven out to near where the lake is for the sex work. And at some point, Krystal got scared. Something bad happened. We don't know what, because Joseph Simpson, has never really said what happened. But at some point, Krystal got scared and she ran out of the car. And she ran and she ran. Along this, she stepped on a wire or something that was in the brush. And here's where it's a little confusing because she was completely nude and she stepped on this wire and there was a prick in her sock. So we're assuming that's where it came from. But I'm wondering what happened to where Krystal's socks would have ended up folded on the rock, because it makes it seem like she put them there. And I guess we'll never really know. I mean, in my mind, I'm kind of thinking maybe she thought she was okay. Like maybe she got to the riverside, she sat down on a rock and she was kind of seeing what happened to the bottom of her foot, took off her socks and folded them there because that was just a mannerism that she had automatically. She just did that even in the panic. She could have had these type of things happen to her before where she was scared of the John who she had picked up, and maybe she just thought, okay, you know, like he did this and I got away, and she took a moment to sit down by the riverside. And that's really all I could think of. Like maybe at that time she did think he wasn't going to go after her. But he did eventually go after her and attacked. He does admit to this, that he got angry and hit her with the rocks nearby. Wow, guys, it's a very whirlwind case for the start and the ending, and it was completely cold in the time between. No other suspects ever came up, but 13 years later they got a match, and Joseph is in jail for life, first-degree murder. And Krystal's mother mentioned that though she did have a troubled past, no matter what, Krystal would always show up with a smile and a hug and just be full of life and kindness. We don't know what could have further been of Krystal's life. Her stepfather would go in to later report like, oh, this was, and her mother kind of would say like, this seems like it's what would have happened to her because she had gone such down a spiral of her life. But she was so young, you guys, and yeah, y'all, like, we don't know what could have happened. She could have turned her life around. Krystal Beslanowitch got justice 13 years later from the M-Vac DNA match. That's this case, y'all. I really wanted to share it with you because when I do report on cold cases, it's very important to keep these stories going so they're not forgotten, so they're not dusted into a shelf of cold cases that will never be solved, because not all detectives or sheriffs are like Bonner, like Sheriff Bonner. He stayed invested in this case for Krystal, and as well as the forensics evidence detective Rudy Ree, and not all investigators are like the ones working on Krystal's case. Okay, y'all, that's all in this case. It was pretty short because it's solved, thankfully, even though the case went on for so long. This video was a little bit short. Please subscribe to my channel if you're new here. If you're interested in vlogs and like things I do with my friends, or like get readies with me, drunk questions, subscribe to my This Is Caitlin vlog life. I'll link it below again. I'll put it here so you can see it on the screen. This is where you can subscribe to my second channel to see what I do on the other parts of my life. Have a good day. Don't forget to like, and if you are as curious as I am about these socks that Krystal had either placed, or maybe Joseph, the suspect, the murderer, had placed on the rock, what do you guys think about that? I'm pretty curious because I told you what I thought. Please leave a comment below. Have a good day. Stay positive, stay happy, stay encouraged. Bye.